The last thing is just on a personal level. As human beings, we like to feel connected, to other human beings, to our sense of community. And when you feel personally invested in your local community, you just tend to feel this sense of purpose. So whether that's, being involved with your kids' school or, local politics, volunteer organizations, you just have stronger bonds to your community and you feel a stronger sense of purpose of living there and being there. So hello, guten Tag. Thank you so much for coming to today's event. I'm very excited to talk to you about why remote workers need local communities. And clearly, you probably feel that this is something you do need because you've taken time out of your schedule to come and join us today. So big thank you to Michael for organizing this event and to Josephine for offering me this very unique opportunity to speak from my home in Denver for an event in Vienna. And also just thank you to Stockwork for providing the space for today's event. So I wanted to kind of see what was the actual distance if we were to put it in both space and time, kind of what is separating us. So this is obviously not an exact map. But I did a quick Google search and we are 5,378 miles or 8,655 kilometers apart. And there's roughly an 8-hour time difference. So while you all are probably having a nice after work drink, I am still drinking my morning coffee. So quite the distance for a location and also just time itself. So a little bit about me. My name is Kimberly Bringas. I've been doing remote for about 6 years, and I've kind of seen that full spectrum of remote from kind of hybrid model to 100% remote, and I'll be diving into that in a little bit. My expertise is in all things HR. At my last company, I was very fortunate to have just touched so many different parts of the organization, such as creating a healthy work environment, working with employees, onboarding, offboarding, the whole spectrum. And my industry has been tech for over 10 years. It kind of blew my mind as I was putting this together. I'm like, wow, I have been in tech for a decade. That's quite a long time. And because I'm a big reader, I wanted to share a couple fun books that I've been reading. So the first is a business book I've read recently, Deep Work by Cal Newport. I personally love it. It dives into the argument that knowledge workers need to schedule time to do deep work for them to be able to effectively solve bigger and more complex problems. And then a fun book is Circe by Madeline Miller. I've been recommending this to friends, family, so I thought I'd share it here as well. I personally love stories where they take something that I know, such as in this case, the Odyssey, and tell it from a different perspective. So in this case, it was from the goddess Circe's perspective. So if you're got some vacation time saved up or you're going to be on a plane, it's a really nice way to pass the time. So one of the things I like to do, especially when I'm not as familiar with a country, with a certain group, is I like to do a little research to try to find some similarities, because a lot of times I think there's this emphasis on what makes us different. And I always like to look at kind of how are we similar? And so in my research, I found a couple really fun overlaps between Denver, Colorado and Vienna, Austria. So the first is that we are both top-ranking quality of life cities. So Denver has the past, quite a few years now been ranked in the top 10 in the US, and we were number 2 as of 2019. But I was incredibly impressed that I came across the Mercer Quality of Living Survey, and Vienna has ranked number 1 for the past 10 years. So that's incredibly impressive and something Denver I would love to aspire to. And so I was looking at, okay, maybe what could be contributing to this great quality of life city? And so one of the things I found is this emphasis on the clocking off mentality, that there's a big importance on, work is important, but having time outside of work to focus on family, friends, activities, there's a high value to that. And it's actually one of the reasons I moved to Denver from the Bay Area, which is in Northern California, just because I needed a little bit more of that balance. And the other thing I found is this emphasis on outdoor hobbies. So it turns out the state of Colorado and the country of Austria both have beautiful outdoor terrains. So there's a huge emphasis on things like hiking, skiing, backpacking. So being able to get outside and enjoy nature for all its wonderfulness. And lastly, this one really tickled me. It turns out we both love our local craft beer and coffee. Fun fact, Colorado has more than 400 established breweries. So if you like beer, Denver is a great place to come visit. And I also saw that Vienna, has a huge support for local craftsmanship and even has its own local craft beer festival, which is pretty amazing. And I was reading up on Viennese coffee houses, and they just sound delightful. And it just seems like coffee is such a central, drink in Vienna and Denver as well. We like our coffee. I mean, we're a bit more US that we a lot of times like to take our coffee to go, but there's this emphasis on quality, which is really important. So that being said, now that we have seen that we have maybe some similarities that you didn't know about, let's go ahead and hop into today's agenda. So first, I wanted to touch on kind of my journey with remote and the path that I had, and then how that affected kind of my understanding of the importance of investing in local communities. And that's from a personal needs standpoint, from a professional needs, and also there's some overlap in between. And then I always like to give groups that I'm speaking to kind of some actions. And so these are some pro tips that I've collected, both from building my local communities when I was in the Bay Area, but also what I'm doing here in Denver as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So my path into remote work was almost accidental, kind of driven by luck. I happened upon remote because I had, interviewed for this job, and it just happened to be with a company that valued remote work. So at the time they had offices in San Francisco and Ann Arbor, and I was near the San Francisco office. So I was having kind of this hybrid split of going into the office sometimes and then working from home at times. But at that time, I had heavily invested in my local communities because I grew up in the Bay Area, and there were professional groups that I was part of. So I was attending events, meeting people, and some of my contacts I am very close to even to this day. And they've been instrumental in helping me grow and develop my career. And then I decided to make a big life change. I decided the Bay Area just wasn't for me anymore, and I decided to move to Denver. And this was a big shift for me to go to 100% remote. I mean, I could just do a whole other talk on what that transition was like. But it was one of the hardest transitions for me because I essentially didn't have any type of network when I moved. I didn't have social groups. I didn't have professional networks. I was just all on my own, and I was working 100% remote. So kind of my focus first became like, okay, I need to create some social groups. So I'm a big salsa dancer. So I found like the salsa dance community and other dance communities. But over time, I kind of was feeling like there was a gap, and I wasn't quite sure what it was. And initially I thought, oh, since I'm 100% remote, I should be building my global community. So joining forums and Slack channel groups, and I started contributing to different publications, speaking at virtual events. But even with all of that and all of these great connections I was making, I still felt like there was something missing. So that's where I started looking at, okay, if the global community isn't completely, fulfilling that need, what's lacking? And the clarity came when I left my last job. I decided to take an extended break and kind of rethink, what do I want from my career? What do I want just in general? And I recognized one of the things I didn't have that I had in the Bay Area was this local community connection, specifically in business. And so once I went to a local event with a friend of a friend and just was in the same room with, my tech peers, I was like, this is what was missing. And so now I'm spending time trying to figure out, okay, what are my volunteer opportunities, and trying to kind of tap into those local networks here to balance that out a little bit. So this now dives into looking at why investing in local communities is really important for remote workers. So I'm going to first touch on kind of the personal needs that it can fulfill. So the first is just mixing up your routine and having real life interactions. When you're a remote worker, especially if you're at home all day, it can get pretty stagnant and at times maybe a little boring. So just having reasons to get out of your house, talk to people. I had what was called Friday Lunch Club for a while with a group of friends where we would meet up, once a month on a Friday just to hang out in person. And I just noticed kind of my moods and my energy level was very different on the days that I had something to look forward to and to get out of the house. The second is kind of rethinking my sense of time. So one of the huge benefits to becoming a remote worker is you're not commuting anymore. You're not on a train, you're not in a car for, 1 to 2 hours a day. So being able to see how I could maybe leverage those former commute hours for new purposes, I found to be very energizing. You'd be like, where can I actually put this time that I was spending, in a car, on a bus, however you were getting to work, and reinvest it elsewhere. So that was kind of an energizing realization. And then the last thing is just on a personal level, as human beings, we like to feel connected, to other human beings, to our sense of community. And when you feel personally invested in your local community, you just tend to feel this sense of purpose. So whether that's, being involved with your kids' school or, local politics, volunteer organizations, you just have stronger bonds to your community and you feel a stronger sense of purpose of living there and being there. So then professional, because we definitely have those. So this was actually brought to me by someone in my network when I kind of pitched the question, what are some needs that are fulfilled by investing in your local communities? And I loved this one. He had said that he loved having access to creative and innovative local projects, because when you're a remote worker, a lot of times you're not having those in-person collaborative moments. So being able to meet with people who care about things that you care about, be able to brainstorm, problem solve, and then more importantly, being able to see an actual impact on a local level, that by completing that project, that program, whatever it is that you're working on with someone, you not only feel those really strong connections with the person, but you actually get to see the fruits of your labor. And then the second is cost-effective career growth opportunities. A lot of times we think, oh, if I'm going to, do professional development, I need to go to a conference, for instance. But that takes, time, money, energy, to go from one place to another. And yeah, there are a ton of online training courses, which also are great. But what's kind of missing is that in-person human connection. So being able to find training programs, maybe classes to take, volunteer opportunities, it's a win-win for both you and your employer, because if you're able to say, hey, I found this great training opportunities, it's for a month on Wednesdays in the afternoon, and it's only going to cost the company, I don't know, let's say $150. That's much more attractive than you needing to spend thousands of dollars to get to a conference. And also just personally, for me to travel to go do things takes a lot of energy on my part. So knowing it's a day commitment is much more appealing at times as well. And this one, I feel this last point is the most important, because this was something that I had when I was in the Bay Area that I'm starting to build here in Denver, is just that feeling of being professionally supported by local peers and mentors. Being able to have that lunch, that coffee to talk with someone about your career path, where you want to go, what's important to you, is very energizing to have in person. And then it leads back up to the first point is, your local peers can tell you about things that are going on in your community, about conferences, events that you should attend. Maybe they chair an organization that they think you would be a good fit for. So it's helping you get exposed to things that are also in your local community by having those local connections. And then lastly, things do not live in separate spheres. The professional and the personal needs can overlap. So in both settings of just kind of you as a person and then you as a worker, taking the time to invest in your local communities can address feelings of loneliness and isolation, because even remote companies that do things really well and are very intentional about, creating connections amongst their employees, remote can only take you so far, and you can feel disconnected and distracted and feel a sense of loneliness. And so this is a good way to kind of, be able to kind of energize yourself by being able to, get outside your house and make those connections. And then the next one, which is one of my favorites, is being able to creatively think of ways to mutually benefit your company and your local community. There's so many potentials, such as accessing a local talent pool for your recruiting pipeline, or maybe your company would give you funds to be able to, invest in different volunteer organizations. There could be potential that there's local businesses you could partner with in a really meaningful way. The point is that by you being able to kind of, flex your creativity muscles and find, those connections, it can end up benefiting not just you, but also your employer as well. And then lastly, this was a more recent realization for me, is that you can inspire your global teammates to also invest in their local communities. So by sharing what you're doing, where you're getting meaningful connections, it can help them to start thinking about, oh, well, where could I, find those really meaningful connections, within my local community as well. And what I found is it's actually a very meaningful way to connect with your coworkers, that, especially when you're spanning, different continents, right? Being able to find those similarities, kind of like what I did earlier between Denver and Vienna, it's just a very human way to get to know someone, because where you spend your time is a very good indication about what you care about. And that's such a nice way to be able to share that with your coworkers. So it can just create some bonds between you and your coworkers as well. So kind of big picture, what this does is it gives you just a much more, balanced, much more connected approach to kind of how you're doing your day-to-day work, how you're, connecting with your community. And this is why I think, Michael's investment to create this event is so great, because he's essentially trying to provide you a space, to be able to access each other and become, peer support or mentors, or, help you all become aware of different opportunities within, your own community. So, this is definitely a space that you want to invest in. And I know he wants to make this a recurring type event. So, just by you showing up today, saying, says to me that you actually care about wanting to create that sense of community as well. So lastly, I always like to give some action, some pro tips of, based on what I've learned, to help you make these meaningful connections in your communities. So the first one is just realizing it is a long-term commitment. I don't know about you. I am not a patient person by nature. Ask my mom. She's just like, that's not been my thing. So there were times where it was just really frustrating that I would go to things and it just wouldn't quite be a fit. But I ended up changing my mentality a little bit to sometimes figuring out what isn't a fit can help me find the thing that is. Which then leads me to my second point of looking for short-term wins. So you need to find ways to keep yourself energized as you're kind of going through, like going to different events, meeting people, and, just thinking, okay, what did I get out of this? Like, did I make a new contact? Did I learn something? Did I learn about another event? Essentially kind of finding ways to keep that energy level up by figuring out like, oh, this was worth my time. Which then leads to my next point of managing expectations. It can be really difficult as you're kind of like trying to form these connections, knowing it's going to take time, to just essentially know that it's not always going to be a win. So I've definitely gone to events and my takeaway was, well, at least I got out of the house. that is my win for today. And so understanding that, going in thinking, okay, my expectations are low in the sense of just like, I got here, I got out of the house, I'm going to talk to maybe a couple of people, hopefully learn at least one thing. And then that way it feels like it was a good use of your time and it can keep you from getting frustrated. And most importantly, just like this event today, if you've had the chance to connect with someone, follow up with them afterwards. I've definitely had it where I've been at events and I'm talking to someone and I'm like, wow, they're very interesting. I would then say, hey, so I have the LinkedIn app on my phone. Is it okay if I add you to my network? You may not feel comfortable doing that, but I've actually found people are very receptive to it. So they'll, type in their name and then I have a request sent. So by the time I get home, I can then message them with thanking them for their time. Also reminding them how we met, because sometimes at these events, it can get a little blurred. But then also follow up with some sort of request saying, hey, I really enjoyed our chat on, these things. I'd like to continue it. Are you up for, maybe a cup of coffee? And I can't stress this enough, make it very easy for them to schedule time with you. So I personally like the Calendly app because it syncs with all my calendars. I send them the link and then they can pick a time that works for them. But investing in really good calendaring tools can help, those really annoying back and forth emails of just trying to get together. So make it very simple for them. And then lastly, this has really gone a long way with helping me create really meaningful connections in my, just in my local and global community, is I'm always looking for a way to offer connections and resources to whoever I'm meeting. So as I'm, talking to them, I'm intently listening for ways that I can add value to our connection. So that can be things such as, connecting them to someone in my network, telling them about an event I'm going to that they might be interested in, and sending them the information afterwards. Mainly because, quite frankly, sometimes going to, especially in-person events, can feel a little awkward and, maybe not, especially depending on kind of where you fall in like the introvert to extrovert spectrum, is maybe not, it can take a lot of effort for you to do these things. So I found as a way to kind of combat that is to try to make the connections between people as meaningful as possible. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for connection. We're looking, to be able to connect with people in a really meaningful way. And I've been talking for quite a bit, so I just want to thank you for listening. And also at this time, just open it up to any questions that you have. Just side note, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you, but thank you so much for listening. And yes, any questions for me?
Thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, any questions? Anybody?
Don't be shy. No question is silly.
Give everyone like a minute to.
You're all processing, I know. Just so much content.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yes.
I was wondering about, so I have a plan to go, so I don't want to work for, like, from home all the time. So I want to use remote opportunities to visit other places, like for a longer weekend or a couple of weeks or someone to see. And my problem is that I can't work in a coffee shop. So do you know like any resources, or do you have like a good place to find places to work remotely?
Yes, so it was a little fuzzy. So I heard that you tend to travel, so you'll be working for a few weeks in a certain location. You're not a fan of coffee shops, and you're looking for places where you could do work. Is that correct?
Yes.
So this is where spending time first investing in kind of global contacts does help. And just putting a call out like, hey, I'm going to be in, let's say, Berlin for 3 weeks. Does anyone have any local contacts for me I should connect with, or know of any co-working spaces in the area that would be great to work from? And then kind of going from there. So the more advanced notice you can do that, because I actually do that, believe it or not, with salsa dancing, that if I'm going to be in a certain city, I put it out on my more social networks saying, hey, does anyone know of anything? And the thing I have found is the world is much smaller than we think it is. And so I have found great opportunities just for salsa dancing. And, it can definitely translate to just being able to find great spaces to work. And then it would be great if you could even, meet some of those people in person. But it is kind of like, if your trip is coming up, like trying to do that at least several weeks before, so you have things teed up before you get there. And also I just do like Google searches, like I'll take the address maybe at the Airbnb that I'm staying at, plug it in, and then just do a quick Google search, see what's around me. Like, are there any co-working spaces? Are there any cool offices? I even have had friends do this. I personally have not done this, but they have contacts at different people, different companies, and they just ask, hey, can I work from your office while I'm here visiting? Is that okay? I mean, if they have like super secretive things that they're working on, they may not let you. But you know, if they have kind of like an open office space sort of setup, even like work from, you know, their offices. But I always say, like, try to plan for that ahead of time, reach out to your different networks. So by the time you get there, you already know, like, okay, I'm going to have, you know, lunches with a couple of these people. I'm going to work from this office for a little bit. I'm going to do this co-working space. So planning definitely does help. So you're not trying to figure it out once you're just, you know, once you get there.
And I mean, my the social network that I use the most right now is Facebook. But I'm slowly like starting to use it less and less often. I'm starting to use like Twitter, but on Twitter, like there's no one that I know. Like, I don't have many contacts, so I'm not really hopeful of finding much like helpful information on social networks. So, but I was like wondering on the like, for example, maybe there could be some kind of a place like a website, like you suggested, Nomad is, right? Where I could ask for, you know, or maybe like some kind of a ranking of like co-working spaces based on this area, other than like just looking it up like on Google Maps.
So Josephine, the audio is pretty muffled for me. I'm having a really hard time hearing.
I'll repeat that if you want.
Yes, that would be helpful. I'm so sorry. It's just, I'm sure you're speaking very clearly, but my audio is just not so great.
Oh, no problem. So basically, sorry, the mic is actually just there for show. It's not actually working right now. We were going to use it, but then we realized that the laptop mic works better for her. So that's why it's a little bit far. Anyways, so basically he's asking more so for like websites or apps or things that maybe rank certain cities or have like a co-working space ranking or something, like a site that provides that kind of information, because he says that his social network is a bit lower. Like he uses Facebook, but not really that much. And then Twitter is like, that's kind of the thing. Do you know any? I actually have one if I can interject real quick.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So there's this app called Croissant, and like the bread, and people use that to jump around co-working spaces and check out because they have a lot of cities who are partnered, a lot of co-working spaces in different cities that are partnered and on the app. So if you get a membership, you can you can just basically book a spot at the co-working space and then use it for however long you need. There are different membership types, but that's one of them I know of. Do you know of any other?
That's fantastic. So I use LinkedIn a lot. So I use the term digital due diligence, but basically just means digital stalking. And like, as I'm searching for people who are involved with remote work, when I add them, I always add a personal note saying, you know, hey, I noticed you're really you're an advocate for remote work, or we're in the same industry or space, I would love to connect, with a fellow remote worker. And what'll happen, especially with something like a social, network like LinkedIn, eventually it'll start seeing the type of matches that you're making and start making recommendations, not just for people to connect to, but also groups as well. And there's quite a few LinkedIn remote groups that you can join. Always with social media, though, it does take some trial and error to kind of find those connections. So that has been really successful for me, of just like taking that time to, search for people. And especially if you're going to be in a certain city, like what companies are in that city. And then from there, when you look at their company page, you can see which workers are based there. and then just connecting with them there, like, hey, I'm going to be in, where it is, Paris, Berlin, Madrid, and I'm looking for remote workers to connect with. And I've actually found most people, it feels weird to initially ask something from a stranger, but just making that request, like, I'm just trying to find, these resources when I'm there, a lot of times they're quite helpful. So I have found it's kind of being a little bit brave and asking for things as you're making those connections. And that's how kind of I have found my local communities. So now if I were to, do a status post in LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm going to be in this city, who lives there? I would love to connect. And I also, there's a whole bunch of like Slack channels. I have a couple of resources I can send you afterwards that can be sent out. But there was one that had 20 different potential Slack channels you could join that specifically was for remote workers. But of course, like I said earlier, it's kind of a long-term investment of your time of just trying out the different groups, trying out the different channels to kind of find the one that's going to fit you. So just knowing it's going to take a little bit of an investment.
Thanks. One more question?
I would like to follow up on this question. I don't know if this is an international thing, but at least in Austria, there are also co-working hotels.
Co-living.
So you can stay like in a hotel and it's a co-working space as well, which would be probably an ideal fit for you. Okay.
There are not many co-working hotels in Vienna. There is Charlotte Hotel. There is a few in London and maybe just a few other places.
So when you say co-working hotels, it's not co-living, it's different from.
It's different.
Oh, okay.
Hotels notice that there is a huge gap for people who are traveling, and they should use this concept as co-working to bring more people because the lobbies are empty in hotels, and so that's why they decided, okay, we can explore it. Actually, it's a hotel. So
it's a hotel. Oh, okay.
They are just providing that service, like we are also doing co-working spot.
Are there co-working hotels in Denver by any chance?
Co-working hotels, no, but I can definitely give you a list of co-working locations. But this whole thing of co-living was actually something I didn't hear about till maybe 2 years ago. There's a ton of them now that offer you both living, like essentially like a hotel room, but then provide all of these like communal meeting spaces. So that's also something to look into as well. They're sometimes called different things. I've heard co-living. I haven't heard the term co-working hotel, but sometimes it takes a few Google searches to get the right terms. But like a coworker of mine went all through South America for a while. One was in Hawaii for a bit. Another one did it in, I think, like Thailand. So there's definitely like quite a few options now that didn't exist before.
Yeah, we were saying over here that the co-working hotels are actually just hotels that provide the co-working space because you said lobbies are empty anyways. So, but it's like literally just a hotel, which is cool. That's cool.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that. That's very cool.
Co-working hotel, like really like that, like as a concept, like maybe there's one. And the other one is like just a hotel that said, yeah, well, someone can use a lot of there. So
my personal experience with that concept of co-working hotel is that they recognize co-working as something new, something high. And people don't have that intention to go to hotels for a meeting, for coffee, or for anything else if they are not in the hotel. So that's why they decided to bring co-working to hotels like something it's added value. So that's their hotels. They're just providing them, okay, we have co-working. Wow, that's great. So we'll go there.
Did you get that, or should? Yeah.
I heard little bits, but I actually think it seems like this question has kind of prompted like a really nice maybe group discussion. So I don't maybe want to inhibit that. Maybe this could be like a good kind of segue into maybe like a group discussion of what are your resources when you travel to get that sense of local community when you are on the move. Like that's a really cool topic. So
I mean, does anybody have any other questions before? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I do. Well, first of all, I think my feeling is that I try to get in touch with a few remote work experts in the past. And my feeling is that similar to the agile community like 10 years ago, I think anybody in remote first environments is really like working in an environment which is really interesting. It's like these pioneers and early adopters that are sort of into this currently, right? And I think we shouldn't be too shy in terms of getting in touch because they're really interested and keen in sort of supporting remote workers in general. So people are very supportive. It's not like when you ask someone in LinkedIn, it's not like you're trying to sell something. They might not answer that, but if you ask them for support at remote worker, it's like a different thing because there's a shared interest.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So being in remote work for about 6 years, I have actually found the remote community to be some of the kindest, most open people in terms of wanting to share resources and best practices, mainly because remote is still so new in the sense of kind of the scale that it's starting to get out, that there are now whole companies that are embracing it as their work model. So we're kind of all learning together. And so that was one of the, especially since I'm just a very curious, forward type person, I'm always the person with a ton of questions, wanting to get to know people and connect. The fact that I have felt such positive reception to that curiosity and to questions and to try to just figure things out together. That's something that I hope you take away from this today, that, not being afraid to ask for those, resources for ideas, that in general, the remote community really wants to help. But for me, the thing that was lacking was just, also leveraging my in-person peers, like people in my actual local communities, in my cities, like having a balance between the two is really important. But yeah, I agree. People are wanting to help, so don't be afraid to ask.
Cool. Is any other questions that we can take? Also, I mean, you can connect with Kimberly on LinkedIn. So she will definitely accept your invite.
And reminder, just say, hey, I heard you talk at at this event, just to remind me, because I do get, different types of requests. So again, it's a good follow-up practice for you to be like, this is how we met. This is what I would like to know further. And I will inundate you with so many resources. I have so many links now where I'm that person being like, oh, read this and read this and read that. So you'll have quite a bit. So please don't be shy. And yes, please connect.
Cool. I think.
I mean, I have thousands of questions still, but yeah. Anybody else? Like one of the questions that I still, if you still got a few minutes,
Sure.
Puzzling me is I totally believe in sort of this combination of having the global community reaching out, just like we discussed it now, and then there's these super important local communities where you can sort of get in touch closely. And I really enjoy this meetup, and I'm looking forward to having the local conversations as well. But this is just like a very tiny puzzle piece in our personal needs as humans and professionals when it comes to communities. So what were like local communities that you yourself found very useful? How did you, where did you hook up? Where did you meet other people? And yeah, like what type of local communities did you?
Yes, great question. So definitely a local HR community is very important to me. So I definitely have HR contacts that are both my peers and also people who are kind of ahead of me. So having those type of contacts, especially because I don't know about your profession, but HR can be kind of lonely at times because a lot of what I do is confidentiality based, a lot of it's privacy based. So it's not like I can just go talk to a random coworker about like an HR problem that I'm trying to solve. So having those local HR contacts that I could hash out with in person, especially if I'm feeling very stressed or very overwhelmed by something, is really important. The other one is looking at kind of what are my identities and what do I need to connect with more? So the event I went to a couple weeks ago is called Out in Tech. It's an LGBTQ community, and that's a community I identify with. And they were specifically trying to foster a sense of community for this group in tech. So sometimes if you are personally identifying with a certain group, also like it could be anything from, race to, gender to, socioeconomic, there could be just a ton of different ones. So for me, since I'm very involved in the LGBTQ community, finding something that tied specifically to tech was very powerful, because I would definitely want to have those opportunities to try to make, that situation better for the group that I am part of. Now, because this was more a recent realization, I'm only starting to build these local communities. I'm speaking more from kind of like the business professional side of things. But from the personal, it's just having hobbies that I really enjoyed. Like I mentioned, I'm a salsa dancer. So I have a salsa group that meets once a week, and just being able to be creative and collaborative with them just adds a whole energy spike to my week. I just feel so much better after just spending a couple hours like dancing and talking about dance and nerding out over that. So being able to kind of find both those professional and personal groups to be part of, you really do need both.
I see.
Cool.
So, yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on one thing. So, I mean, I've been working remotely. Well, I've never worked in a real office. I've only been working remotely since I started. So, working from home, working while traveling. I'm actually currently based in Lisbon, so I mean, I identify with moving everything 100%. And I'm actually also currently working on an app for remote workers, for kind of a homestay community for remote workers. And something that I found through my research is that a lot of, that's especially people who live in rural communities that are struggling with loneliness while working remotely. And that is still something I think that is very hard. Like, for example, when you're in Vienna or in Denver, I guess it's very easy to just go to meetup and meet people. Also, like now that I'm in Vienna, it's super easy to meet people. Like, you don't even if you're a little bit of an introvert, it's quite easy to meet people by just contacting people or going to meetup. But what if you live in a rural community where everyone else is going to an office? How do you meet people? I have some thoughts on it myself, but I don't know. I think that is still quite a challenge. Also, what I saw during my research. Plus, I think I'm also a big fan of like using remote work to get more people living in villages. The cities are in many cases too crowded. So just would love to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So I think the question is if you're in a more rural community, how can you make those connections if you're a remote worker? Is
Yes.
that something as well? Okay, great. So this is probably one of my favorite aspects of the potential for remote work, is exactly that, is giving access to people who are in rural communities, job opportunities they might not have elsewhere. So this is definitely very prevalent in the US, especially when there was this shift in moving away from manufacturing within the US. There used to be these very, vibrant towns and communities that ended up, going away because the jobs went away. And so they kind of, fell into disrepair, and just people left because there weren't opportunities. And so, if you're in those rural communities, kind of from what I've seen when talking to other people who are trying to do these initiatives, it's sort of tackling what's missing for these rural communities to thrive for remote work settings. So one of the biggest ones is internet access, right? So it would be looking at how could we partner with, internet companies to try to get access for these communities. So sometimes when looking at the situation, for the workers that are already living there, it's how can they partner with their local governments, partner with local schools, local organizations, to try to maybe look at building a little bit more of that infrastructure, because there just isn't that community for them in place. And so again, this is where I go back to, sometimes these initiatives can be a long-term investment, but that could be a really energizing way if you are a person in this rural community who wants to see it thriving, looking at how can I make, meaningful connections with people who already live here to see about getting resources so that we can build something over time. Because you're right, like when you're living in a smaller town versus like a bigger city, when you're in a bigger city, there's just access galore, like you can just meet up with people. So, that can be one way to do it. It can also be, finding people who are maybe in bigger cities who are willing to maybe like, come into the rural communities and like offer their expertise, offer trainings, offer things. So kind of this like connection between bigger cities and rural communities, so they don't feel like there's that big of a divide. That's something that I'm hoping to do now that I'm feeling more energized about, my Denver local community, is thinking about kind of where communities outside of Denver that maybe don't have access to, experts or things that have to do with remote or infrastructure. So there's a lot of possibility there. But there also is that struggle too, like when you don't have something there, how can you help build it? There's like no right, easy one answer, if that makes sense.
Do you know Grow Remote?
Yeah, I mean, well, so.
Or you're gonna do,
Okay,
I did the town taster in Evora. Like I went with them and like did the whole thing, and that was pretty cool what they do. So
yeah,
that's.
I didn't get that. What's cool?
Grow Remote. Do you guys know what that is? Have you heard of Grow Remote? So for those of you who haven't, it's basically this local, like this volunteer-run organization that started in Ireland, and they're trying to make remote work local. So they do events, and they're trying to promote remote work, and it started in Ireland, but they've opened the Portugal chapter, and I think there's a chapter in the US now. I'm not too sure where, but opened one there, and they have one in Brazil, they have one in many places. But the town taster event that I was talking about, basically they Grow Remote takes remote workers from big cities and then bring them to smaller cities in whatever country they're in. Portugal we're talking about, and they spend like 2 days there doing like a local workshop to teach the locals there about remote work and teach or show the remote workers, the options outside the big city. So that's a rural initiative that they do, for example.
Oh, that's amazing. I hadn't heard of that. I'll definitely have to look that up myself.
They're definitely bigger over here in Europe, maybe more in the, by the western, like the Ireland, UK, Portugal areas of the, So that's one I know at least, Cool. Anyone else? All good?
And don't feel panicked. You can always message me questions afterwards. I'm happy to answer them.